What's up guys, just Chrissy here from Tech for Geeks, and they call this phone as the best Android phone or the Android version of Apple's iPhone. Now this is the HTC One M8, it's the successor to the M7, and as most of you already know, the M7 was awarded as the best smartphone last year. I've been using the M8 for the last 2 weeks, and I've got to say I'm really loving the experience just as much as I've enjoyed using the M7. The M8 feels better with its new housing. It uses 90% metal and it's premium as it looks. There are 3 colors to choose from, such as amber gold, gunmetal, which is the one we have here, and silver, but what really stood out to me is the gunmetal, and in my opinion it really complements the design of the phone. The new finish might be an issue to some users as they find it slippery, but to me it's exactly how I wanted it to be. Now the phone feels a lot more comfortable as well when you hold it, and that was one of the biggest issues I was having with the M7 because of its sharp edges. Now following the design changes of the M8 would be its power button, and you'll notice how there's a large black strip above the phone, and that's actually the Air Blaster, and it looks really long by the way, and I wasn't really a big fan of it. And rather than making power button and Air Blaster combined, HTC separated it instead. I mean, it's not too bad, I just think it looks odd on the phone. But the placing of the headphone jack has been relocated as well, and it's now located below the phone next to the micro USB port, and that's really cool, and I'm sure a lot of users will appreciate that. But what's really cool about the M8 is that not only it features better build quality, but having a micro SD card slot this time with the M8 is something you wouldn't expect with this kind of device. And I really appreciate HTC for doing that. And if you watch their launch of the M8, HTC quoted that there's no need to change the build quality in order to have bigger storage. That's true, and that's exactly what they did with the HTC One M8. Now they upgraded the boom sound speakers as well and used new amplifiers, because if you didn't know, HTC and Beats Audio had to end their relationship, so therefore HTC made new amplifiers, which is actually 25% louder compared to the ones on the M7. Now if you want to hear the sound differences between the two, then you can check out our comparison video. Under the hood, the M8 has got all the internals we love. It has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 to handle all the applications, Adreno 330 GPU for the display and graphics, 2GB of RAM for multitasking, 16GB of storage to keep your media files, although you can get this in 32GB as well, but of course using the micro SD card slot will expand its memory. And last but not the least is its bigger 2600 mAh battery, which I'll talk about later on in this video. With this kind of device, benchmark doesn't really matter, to be honest, but for those of you that are curious, I've used Geekbench 3 to perform the test, and on a single core it scored at just over 900, and on a multi-core it scored at over 2500. Converting that into real-world usage, the M8 has been performing very well, and although I did have a lot of issues when I first got this because this is a pre-released unit, but since it has already been launched in Australia, I'm beyond impressed with how well this guy performs. And as for Chrome, it still has that issue displaying intensive websites, but apart from that, once it's loaded, man, the fluidity is superb, and it definitely felt a lot more fluid than the Nexus 5. Everything opens up instantly with no hiccups, and multitasking doesn't seem to be an issue as well, and switching between different applications were very smooth. Now, even though it only has a 2GB of RAM, that's all you need, to be honest, on this device. And now that it's running Android 4.4 KitKat, which only requires half a gig of RAM, you can really tell how HTC implemented their new software on this device. Now the HTC One M8 features the new Sense 6 or 6th Sense, however you want to call it, and unlike Sense 5, which has been completely redesigned compared to the older versions, Sense 6 is a lot more like the complete and final version of 5.0. It looks quite identical to the older version, but at the same time it felt refreshing to see some of the changes that HTC have done on the new software. Now they did introduce new motion gestures called motion launch gestures, and I really love using these gestures because it really gives me a lot of controls the moment I pick up the phone. And not only these gestures are intuitive, it really adds more excitement to the user experience. Now to use these gestures, first you have to lock your phone first and double tap to wake the screen. Swipe in from the right will take you to the home screen. Swipe in from the left will take you to the new blink feed, and swipe down from the top to launch the voice command. Now, another cool command that really made things easier was launching the camera. Rather than adding an extra button, what HTC have done was they've enabled the volume up button to also act as a camera button, which is really cool. And what you need to do is to basically just hold the phone in landscape and press the volume up button, and it will instantly launch the camera application. Now you can also use it to take some snaps, and I've never really had any issues with it, and it actually launches in less than a second, so that's a very nice feature. Again, back to blink feed. Now thankfully I'm seeing it less because with the M7 it is the default home screen, and when you're at the main page, whereas on the M8 it's more like an option if you want to use it or not. Now HTC did updated it and just made it more customizable with more topics and sources that really matter to you, and to also link up with social networks. Now believe it or not, I've actually been using it a lot lately. Now when it first came out on the M7, I wasn't really a huge fan of it, or I guess I wasn't really a big user of blink feed, but now I'm just really using it a lot, and I really find it helpful, especially with what I do. So that's me, and to me, being able to just swipe to the left is just very handy. HTC added more colors on Zen 6 to match the respective themes, and I kind of like this idea where HTC is going, and rather than just having black bars for every system applications, they've instead matched it to the theme that you're currently using. And you still have that option to use the old theme, but for now I just enjoy using different themes. The quick settings has been slightly tweaked. You can now get more options, which is always welcome, and my only criticism is that they could have done something similar with TouchWiz, where you can actually view all the toggles rather than just seeing all these available toggles. So hopefully that's something that HTC would consider doing on perhaps Sense 7 or the next update, but we'll find out. Now I don't know about you, but I hate to close all applications manually. If you use Samsung and LG phones, then you know what I'm talking about. Thankfully, HTC finally added a close recently opened applications button, and Sense 5 didn't have it, so you'll have to close the applications one by swiping it up. And sometimes, I look like I'm on a race trying to kill all the applications, so thankfully they've added a dedicated button for that on Sense 6. Overall, I love where HTC is going with the UI, and I know some of you guys don't like it, but personally I love the layout and how organized it looks, and not to mention that it's also one of the lightest Android skins around that doesn't really affect the performance of the phone. Now I guess the most controversial with the M8 would be its camera, just like the M7. Now rather than bumping up the image sensor, HTC have instead stick to 4 ultra pixel because they think that's enough to capture beautiful shots. It's a bit of a yes and a no. I said no because you just don't get the same sharpness as phones with higher megapixels like the Note 3 for example, but if we were to compare the M8's camera to the M7, it certainly is better, but mostly on the software side. Now HTC calls its new camera as duo camera because of the addition of the lens above the rear camera, and that's actually the depth of field lens, which will let you take photos with a really good depth of field, and it can be applied before or after you take the photos. Now there are 2 focus points, but imagine if it had more. Being able to shoot manual is definitely a huge deal because, to be honest, relying with the auto mode is a pain, and especially trying to get the correct white balance and ISO, and most shots turned out inaccurate like the predecessor, and it just doesn't look like it was taken from a high-end device. Thankfully, I was able to control all the settings, and trust me, if you are familiar with the controls, the results can be really impressive, especially in low light situation. Another disappointment with the camera is the removal of OIS, and I don't know what HTC were thinking, but seriously, why downgrade it? Now, OIS means optical image stabilization, and what it does with videos is it will produce smoother videos and less shaky. Now, to give you a better understanding, here's a comparison between the M7, which had OIS, and M8, which doesn't have an OIS. Heading over to the software side, HTC have really nailed the camera software. It has a ton of new features and they've really applied it to the camera hardware fairly well. Now, looking at all the modes, you have plenty of varieties like auto, HDR, and manual modes. Now, manual mode will let you manually control most of the important settings on every cameras, which is very nice to see, and you can manually focus as well, which is great, and I thought that was really cool as well. And the UI is kind of, you know, like Lumia 1020, but hey, it works very well, so no complaints on that. Now, the photo editing options on this are amazing. There's the U-focus, which uses the depth of field lens, and if you want to apply, just tap to the subject that you want to focus on and it will blur out everything else. Now, you can add different seasons as well, which is really cool, and I know a lot of consumers are going to be using this. And of course, there's the Dimension Plus, which gives your photos a parallax effect. Then you just have to tilt it to see it in action. Now, trust me, the new software is just jam-packed with so many cool features that I just cannot cover all in this review. They can also swipe down to switch to front-facing camera, which is very neat. And speaking of front-facing camera, it's been bumped up to 5 megapixel. It's a lot sharper compared to the 2 megapixel front-facing camera on the M7, but that doesn't mean it's as good as the rear camera. It just doesn't work that way. Overall, the camera is definitely a much improvement compared to the M7, but if the M7 gets the same software update, then it will be a pretty close call. Alright, so with all me talking about my experience with the phone, how does the battery perform based on my day-to-day basis? Now, I usually start using my phone from 9 AM onwards, and I'm a heavy user. I watch a lot of YouTube videos, tweet a lot, and browse the web. And trust me, this thing can easily last me for over 14 hours on heavy consumption. And if you're on a medium consumption, then you can easily get over 19 hours. And on a light consumption, you can easily get 2 days or more out of this phone. Now, we are talking about one single full charge here and with power saving mode disabled, so really impressive battery life on the M8. Now, HTC did introduce extreme power saving mode as well, and unfortunately that's not available in Australia yet, but once it's available, HTC will release an update for the M8. Last but certainly not the least is the display. Now, the M8 features a bigger 5-inch Full HD display similar to the M7 with a pixel density of 441 ppi. Now, it is a Super LCD 3 display just like the M7 but offers warmer color tone, and personally I was kind of expecting the display to have the same tone as the M7, as I find the graphics on the M8 slightly yellowish, especially the icons. Now, that really is just my personal preference, but the M8's display is still gorgeous. It produces a lot of details and really great viewing angles. So I'm sure having a warmer tone won't really be a deal breaker to you guys. The HTC One M8 is definitely a much improved smartphone to the M7. It's also one of those scenarios when you are new to Android, then the M8 is something I'd recommend to you to get, and it has an amazing build quality and speakers that are just top notch, and it's just the best smartphone experience. Now, I know I may sound, biased about the phone, but really, to be honest, this is just my own experience with the phone. It's not the perfect device, but comparing to what's on the market right now, this device is what really stood out to me the most. So there you have it, that's our full review of the HTC One M8, and if you enjoyed this video, then definitely make sure to give this video a thumbs up, and not only you're helping the channel, but it will also help us to make awesome content like this. Now, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, then please do so you won't miss out any of our future content. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+. All the links will be in the description box below. I'm Zins Garcia from Tech for Geeks. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.